The process of making an indie game can really feel like witchcraft to some. The amount of time, effort, and just sheer determination to produce everything needed can feel like some otherworldly force is driving it forward. But many successful indie games are a well-brewed potion, using the right ingredients in the right concentration to create the magic of the game. But if that formula is wrong, the brew may boil over, or worse, turn into something more nefarious. Witchcrafty releases on March 1st, 2022, on Steam for the price of $9.99, although it originally came out in 2021 on, of all things, the PlayStation Vita. Didn't expect that in 2022, did ya? It's a Metroidvania / action game that has a young witch go on an adventure to discover what's causing strife for her little village, but finding that things aren't as simple as first thought. But before I begin, this key was obtained from the developer, Pigeon Dev, for the purposes of review. That won't change my opinion of the game in the end, but you should know that because of FTC guidelines, as well as the whole morals thing, you know? Witchcrafty has you playing as a young witch who wakes up to find that her village is struggling. See, the normally not trouble at all goblins are acting aggressive all of a sudden, and due to your mentor and others trying to actually keep the village up and running, it's up to you to figure out exactly what is going on. This leads you to make your way through the woods on a grand adventure, where there'll be a twist or two along the way, and some okay writing with it. I say okay because what's here is reasonable in terms of writing, but there's not a whole lot to it. You get brief history segments in the levels that set up some of the world that you can come across, and segments at the end bosses and at the start of chapters to put the upcoming gameplay into context. What's sad here is that it probably was the most interesting part of the game for me, as our witch's personality, albeit briefly presented, is fun. She's a smart aleck and lazy at heart, but does have some appeal from a visual and personality perspective, especially with the touches in the menu of her witch tune and her little scribblings. It reminded me of when I first met Shantae in the Shantae series, but unfortunately, this game doesn't really follow up on our witch well. There's a few characters briefly coming up here and there to interact with, and I always wanted to see more of them, but they are there and gone in the snap of a finger, and the game is obviously trying to focus on the gameplay. So let's go there. So the gameplay is action focused in the 2D plane. As the witch, we have a basic attack that we can smack enemies with, and we eventually get the ability to cast a spell, such as a fireball, an ice bolt, and a lightning bolt, which have variations to it in terms of a dash/jump. Speaking of jumping, we have a regular jump, a double jump, and a dash in order to get over hazards. You have 2 hearts to start the game, and don't think those hearts break into halves or quarters. 1 hit, and there goes 1 heart. You could pick up plants that will give you back some hearts, but don't count on them. I'd say you're better off going slow and steady to take things down, because this is where many of the underlying problems of Witchcrafty starts to show. Let's start with actually hitting enemies. This will take some time to really adjust to, because you have to get used to the deceptive range of your attack and of enemies' attacks. The X direction of the attack feels a tiny bit short compared to enemies, but you do get used to it. But the Y direction is a different story. You can reasonably hit above or below the attack animation of about your character height, and it's something that makes certain parts of the game rather easy, especially with bats or flying creatures. Now the game does some things to balance that out in terms of difficulty, but I need to confess something here right away. I feel like at times, the game ate some of my inputs. I was using the Amazon Luna controller on my laptop when playing, and every so often, a button I pressed didn't seem to register. I thought, well, maybe it's the controller. So I tried another game or two with that controller, and no, everything seems to be fine there. Now, I didn't notice the problem as much on the Switch Pro controller I used, but again, it would happen every so often to me, especially in the latter half of the game. So I will say this, before jumping into the game, if you plan on getting it, look around for others who may give some info about the reliability of the controls, because for me, they felt off. Which, feeling off is a theme that will be prevalent in this review. For example, sometimes you'll wonder how you got hit by something, especially with projectiles. It doesn't help when the invincibility frames are so short after you get hit, where a 3 fireball attack can actually get you hit twice even though they're one right after another. The game is merciless in this area. And it leads to one of the biggest overall problems of the game. The basics of information told to the player here are violated on a regular basis. Take this boss fight. I'm going to let this play for 30 seconds. What your job, viewer, is to predict how much of this clip is when you can actually hit the enemy for damage, or when you can't. Oh, yes, there's only a segment that you can actually hit the boss for damage here. So, can you figure it out? Can you determine it? Okay, that's about 30 seconds. So after this segment is done, let me replay the segment of the time that you can actually hurt the enemy at. Yep, that's it. Hard to determine, wasn't it? Visual information for this boss is inconsistent despite being one of the better bosses of the game. The only clue you have that he's vulnerable is that he stops for a brief second and does this pose? But what about this pose is supposed to make you think that you can damage them now? It makes no sense. And what's confusing is that there are boss fights that the information is a lot more clear. Like this one. See that there's a transition to show that damage is done in terms of the boss's state. But that's the thing about this game that came to define it for me. Its inconsistency in the rules throughout the game, which is killer when it comes to any game with low health or reliant on exploration and traversal. Another direct example of this, you dropping through this hole into the next area? Fine. The game shows a Metroidvania map in each of the chapters, and there's no reason to believe you can't go from one area to the next, right? So what about dropping into this one? Nah, it kills ya. Now, you may think that this is something that sucks, but it can only be a slight annoyance in the big picture. Okay, I died, I have to go back, and I've learned my lesson for the next time around. Oh, if it only were that easy. See, save points in this game are pushing it when it comes to usability. As in, the distance between save points can be so large at times, and the branching paths you run across can lead to a lack of progress or just a permanent upgrade, which are important, mind you. But I found myself constantly backtracking to save points that I've already gone to, so I didn't lose progress for the 10th time, because of the inconsistent gameplay and hit systems. And they weren't exactly easy to get back to all the time either. It doesn't help that your starting health is so low, where one mistake can put you at death's door, and those healing plants that I mentioned earlier, they aren't that common. Now look, I actually think that from a design perspective, that kind of difficult and punishing gameplay can work. Forcing the player to replay areas until they are getting through it consistently without a problem is a reasonable design choice. It has been shown to work in games like Jump King. But this comes with a caveat. Consistency must happen. And between the control problems and the information that seemed to be inconsistent, this game was frustrating on a lot of levels. And let's be clear, this game isn't that hard in the big picture. Smack an enemy in range means it's going to die after a couple of hits. You don't have to worry about dodging in a lot of cases. And while there was a hazard or two that was clever, in the big picture, the traps and environmental traversal was rather basic, so it didn't exactly hold up well, especially when repeating areas. The game isn't that long, at 3 to 4 hours at most in a run, and a good amount of that time is you redoing things. But man, I felt like this game struggled at almost every corner to not only be unique, but something that I wanted to keep playing. You know what's a really good example of that? Those spells I indicated before. The Fireball, Ice Bolt, Lightning Bolt are literally the same spell, and only come into play when opening elemental chests in terms of their base form differences and uniqueness. Yes, they have a dash that's a little bit different, but the amount of times that you're going to use that, it's not going to be there. I'm not even sure if they do any different damage from a numbers perspective. And with the low magic meter at the start, it was a lot easier to just use your basic attack almost 90% of the time. In fact, you could reliably focus on that basic attack because, well, you can get into the positions that you really needed to in terms of all the enemy types. It didn't help that when people see the word Metroidvania on a game, they expect a little bit of exploration and map traversal to be a huge part of it. And let's be clear, those who are indicating that this game isn't a Metroidvania are not correct, yet correct at the same time. There are 5 different levels in the game, and they are connected by a flying element that sort of connects the maps together, like one big Castlevania map, but it's just split into sections. And yeah, that is a little bit different, but it does give the feeling of a Metroidvania at first. With that said, most of the alternative paths lead to just an upgrade of items such as the quarter heart or magic pieces, as well as... well, actually, that's just it. Yeah, sure, the currency can be found on those alternate paths, which buy more of those permanent upgrades. Backtracking isn't really present here unless you want to get those upgrades, and yeah, the health upgrade allowed me to make another mistake or two like I complained about before. But man, you set up this world of wonder at the start, and I just didn't want to explore it after 90 minutes in. In fact, the level design as a whole felt weirdly restricting in different ways, but I'll give the game credit on this one. It did make it stand out, albeit usually stand out from a frustrating perspective. Some of the enemies and the abilities that they can have that can go through walls, and some of the tunnels are really restrictive to the point where you can't really dodge or move in them against those attacks, and they can lead to some cheap deaths, especially when you're moving in the wrong direction when it locks onto you. Now, you can adapt and learn the tricks and find that, yeah, you can avoid these problems, but it felt unnecessary in the big picture. They felt more like speed traps than actually testing my skill, and I just felt like I was having my time wasted. Like, I don't like beating up on a game that was made from a place of passion. And it's not like the game falls into the level of Bubsy or The Quiet Man for me. In fact, the game's strongest element is the visuals and the animation quality, on top of the color palette that complements itself from the foreground to the background. Sure, it's not going to blow anyone away from a graphics perspective, but the animation of you rolling or dashing, or even things like the trails of crystals that you pick up, have a sense of wonder, yet beauty to them. Designs of some of these creatures are not overly complicated, but still interesting in their own ways. The quirkiness of characters like the drunk octopus is the kind of fun that I'd want out of a game like this. There's a game here that's trying to break out in terms of character, and it's almost there from a character perspective. It's just that a lot of the design decisions in terms of the overall gameplay package just don't work. But one of the biggest things that you'll be reminded of while playing Witchcrafty is the fact that you can be playing other better games while playing it. In fact, funny story, while I was playing the game, my girlfriend Andrea looked at me confused while I had the music and sound on my laptop. She was wondering why I was playing Sonic the Hedgehog. And yes, the crystals in this game, when being collected sound-wise, sound extremely similar to the rings in the Sonic series, which then doesn't help in wanting me to continue playing. Now I just want to play Sonic. I'm not even sure if that was purposeful in the big picture or some sort of weird homage, but it's something that really stood out. Like, the music isn't bad, the title screen music is reasonable, having action and setting the mood of the game. In fact, mood music is probably how I'd relate the game's overall soundtrack to you. And the sound itself, quality-wise, isn't bad, but again, just reminds me of other games. Just take a listen and hear what I'm talking about. Where Witchcrafty ultimately struggles, though, is the audience. I would recommend that for the developer here, for future projects, really focus on the group that you're making the game for. This game, for example, isn't for hardcore players of the genre. They're not going to like the lack of systems, the enemy variety, or even boss challenges in the big picture. Yeah, they'll have a moment or here or two that will work for them, but not enough where the audience will be satisfied. For new players of the genre, they'll be frustrated with the information presented and the real lack of recovery mechanisms to help them out. And yes, I do appreciate a story mode for those players, but it's just not worth it for the story written here. Young players will probably like the visuals, but will get frustrated as well. And again, the inconsistency will hurt them and they'll just probably leave. That's the biggest problem with Witchcrafty. It isn't the fact that some of the systems don't work. It's just that I don't know who to recommend the game for, because all of the points have weaknesses that are that big. Now, the game isn't buggy per se. The fact of the matter is, I didn't have any frame drops. I didn't have any real issues in terms of the bugs, but some of the bugs that were labeled by other reviews, they weren't bugs, they were the actual systems in play. Yes, systems can be purposefully designed to be actually, different. And so I wouldn't consider all of these bugs, with the exception of the control one. I don't know if that was actually the game, though. I did my best to try to isolate it, and it seems to be the game, but I can't 100% prove it. It's why the game gets a 45 out of 100 for me, making it a no-buy. Yes, that may seem harsh for a $9.99 game that's 3 to 4 hours in length, but the frustrations of the systems, its lack of a unique drawing point, and just an overall feeling that there are other games for that price point you can play that do their job better, many that I've highlighted on Twitch, is why I can't recommend the game in the big picture. There's something here to build upon in terms of the future. The characters, the presentation style, there's a good amount to work off of here. But the gameplay needs refinement. Refinement. Even my enhancer system, which takes the more subjective elements of the game and tries to match it with you, isn't much help here for those who are looking for a game to purchase. The fact is, here they are. As you can see, not many of them in combination are really going to be worth your time in terms of, oh yeah, I'll buy this on a sale. Most of the time, it will just be, nah, I'm gonna skip it this one. To end this review, I don't want people to feel that this game doesn't have any worth. The fact of the matter is that Pigeon Dev created something that has heart to it. Any sort of artistic endeavor will have some sort of heart in it, and it is clear with the quirkiness of some of the characters, some of the elements in the menu, and little things here and there, that there's passion behind Pigeon Dev. This isn't an asset flip. This isn't somebody just throwing things at the wall and hoping it will stick. This isn't NFTs. This is a team that really wants to succeed. With that said, I would recommend to Pigeon Dev to focus on the actual quirkiness. Work on that writing. That seems to be the biggest strength of your game, your presentation and your writing. Focus on the adventure element and focus on maybe getting a consultant or two for the gameplay design perspective. Because I feel like you have technical prowess here and you have the ability to create a great game in the future. You just need to listen to the criticisms of some of the other reviews and really focus on your gameplay as opposed to being more generic. Anyway, that's it for this review. If you liked it, hit that like button, and if you want more content like this, hit that subscribe button. I do indies over on Twitch about 2 to 3 times a week. I've also played Yakuza on Fridays until I beat that game. And I don't know what I will review next. The fact of the matter is, I usually indicate what I'm looking at next in the Discord, which you can join in the description below. That's it for now. And as always, keep on gaming.